The first snow of December fell over Columbus like powdered sugar. From the kitchen window, I watched it gather on the bare branches of the maple tree in our front yard, the same tree Ethan and I had planted the spring after we bought the house. Back then, we had laughed about how small it looked, just a thin stick in the ground with a few nervous leaves. One day, Ethan had said, wrapping his arms around my waist, that tree's going to be huge. People will drive by and say, "Wow, that couple really built something." I remembered smiling at that. Built something. For 8 years I believed we had. I believed we had built a marriage strong enough to survive long workdays, bills, family arguments, and the slow fading of honeymoon excitement. I believed love was not just flowers and vacations, but grocery lists, mortgage payments, and choosing each other even when life became ordinary. But that December, something inside our home felt colder than the snow outside. Ethan had been coming home late for months. At first, he blamed work. He was a real estate agent, and according to him, December was suddenly busier than people thought. There were clients who could only meet after dinner, contracts that needed last-minute signatures, sellers who were emotional about the holidays. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Because believing him was easier than admitting what my instincts had been whispering. He had started taking his phone everywhere, to the bathroom, to the garage. Even when he went downstairs just to grab a bottle of water, his phone went with him. He laughed at texts he would not show me. He changed his passcode. He started using phrases like, "I need space, and you're always reading into things, and can we just have one peaceful night?" Peaceful. That word had become his shield. If I asked why he smelled like perfume, I was disturbing his peace. If I asked why he came home after midnight, I was disturbing his peace. If I asked why he no longer kissed me when he walked through the door, I was dramatic, insecure, and apparently determined to ruin the evening. So I stopped asking. Not because I stopped noticing, because a woman can only be called paranoid so many times before she learns to become quiet. That night, I was decorating the Christmas tree alone. Again. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and pine needles. A holiday movie played softly in the living room, though I had stopped paying attention 20 minutes earlier. I was standing on a small step stool, trying to place a silver star ornament near the top of the tree, when Ethan's phone buzzed on the coffee table. I froze. He was upstairs in the shower. Normally, his phone would have been with him. That alone made my stomach tighten. It buzzed again. I told myself not to look. I told myself that looking would make me the kind of wife he accused me of being. Suspicious, bitter, desperate for a problem. But then the screen lit up, and I saw the name. Vanessa. I knew Vanessa Cole. Not well, but enough. She worked with Ethan at the real estate office. Pretty, polished, always wearing heels, too expensive for someone who claimed to be just starting out. I had met her twice at office events. Both times she had smiled at me like she already knew something I did not. The message preview appeared on the screen. For a moment, I did not move. The ornament slipped from my hand and landed softly on the carpet, but I barely heard it. I just stared at the phone. Your mom. Green dress. Christmas. Already belong. My heart began to pound so hard that I could feel it in my throat. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. The screen was locked, but the message was still there, glowing like something poisonous in the dim golden light of our living room. I read it once, then again, then a third time, because some part of my mind was still trying to rearrange the words into something less devastating. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe Vanessa meant something else. Maybe Ethan's mother, Diane, had invited her because she really had nowhere to go. Maybe I was misunderstanding. But deep down I knew. A wife always knows the difference between confusion and confirmation. Upstairs, the shower was still running. I stood there in front of the Christmas tree, surrounded by ornaments from 8 years of marriage. Our first Christmas together. Our trip to Denver. The little ceramic house Ethan bought me after we closed on this place. Memories hung from every branch like evidence from a life that had already died before I noticed. My hands were cold, not from the weather, from the realization that my husband was having an affair, and his mother knew. No, worse than that. His mother was helping. I set the phone back exactly where it had been. Then I walked into the kitchen, gripped the edge of the counter, and tried to breathe. My first instinct was to run upstairs, bang on the bathroom door, and demand the truth. I imagined Ethan stepping out in a towel, wet hair, annoyed expression, already preparing to twist everything back on me. "You went through my phone? That's not what it means. Vanessa is just a friend. My mom was only being nice. You're crazy, Claire." I could hear it before he even said it, and suddenly I did not want to give him the chance. Not yet. I reached for my own phone and called my younger sister, Megan. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Claire, everything okay?" The sound of her voice almost broke me. I pressed my hand over my mouth and turned toward the window, watching the snow fall harder under the streetlight. "Claire?" Megan asked, sharper now. "What happened?" I swallowed. "I think Ethan is cheating on me." There was silence. Then her voice dropped. "What did you find?" I told her about the message, every word. When I got to the part about Diane, Megan let out a slow breath full of anger. "His mother said that? That Vanessa should wear the green dress," I whispered. "That she should look like she already belongs." Megan cursed under her breath. I closed my eyes. "I feel stupid," I said. "I feel like everyone knew except me." "No," Megan said immediately. "Don't do that. Don't you dare turn their betrayal into your shame." My throat tightened. "She invited her to Christmas dinner, Meg." "Who did?" "Diane. She told me Ethan was bringing a coworker who had nowhere else to go." Megan was quiet for a second. Then she said, "That is not kindness. That is a setup." I looked toward the living room where the tree lights blinked softly, innocent and cheerful. "I should just not go." "No," Megan said. Her answer surprised me. "What?" "If you don't go, Diane gets to control the story. She'll tell everyone you were cold, unstable, jealous, whatever helps her make Vanessa look like the better woman." I hated that she was right. Diane Bennett had never liked me. She had tolerated me the way someone tolerates a stain on expensive furniture, politely, with irritation underneath. When Ethan and I got engaged, she told him, not quietly enough, that I was sweet but not exactly impressive. At our wedding, she wore champagne. At Thanksgiving, she corrected my recipes. When Ethan forgot my birthday 2 years in a row, she told me, "Men are busy, Claire. Mature women don't need constant attention." And I had taken it. For years, I had taken it. Because I loved Ethan, because I wanted peace, because I thought being a good wife meant swallowing small humiliations before they became big fights. But now Diane had crossed a line I could no longer pretend was invisible. "Claire," Megan said gently, "listen to me. You need proof. Not emotions. Proof." I wiped my face and stood straighter. "The shower upstairs turned off." "I have to go," I whispered. "Call a lawyer tomorrow," Megan said. "Promise me." I looked at Ethan's phone on the coffee table. "I promise." When Ethan came downstairs 10 minutes later, wearing sweatpants and the easy smile he used when he wanted life to feel normal, I was hanging the last ornament on the tree. "Looks good," he said. I turned and smiled. "Thanks." He glanced at his phone, picked it up, and his face changed for half a second. Only half a second, but I saw it. The small tightening of his mouth, the quick flick of his eyes toward me, the silent calculation. "Everything okay?" I asked. He locked the screen quickly. "Yeah, just work." Work. Such a small word for such a large lie. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney from my car in the parking lot of a grocery store. I did not cry during the call. I answered questions clearly. Marriage length, property, accounts, possible infidelity, shared assets. When the attorney asked whether I had evidence, I looked at the photos I had taken of Ethan's phone notification before the screen went dark. "Yes," I said, "and I'm going to get more." Over the next 2 weeks, I became quiet in a way Ethan mistook for surrender. I smiled when Diane texted me about Christmas dinner. I did not react when Ethan said Vanessa might stop by because she didn't have family nearby. I collected screenshots, credit card statements, hotel charges Ethan had labeled as client meetings, and a receipt for a bracelet I had never received. Then, 3 days before Christmas, Diane sent the message that removed any last doubt. I stared at the words, "Try to be welcoming." I almost laughed. Instead, I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the envelope my attorney had given me that morning. Inside were the divorce papers, clean, organized, ready. I placed them in a red envelope and tied it with a gold ribbon I had bought for wrapping Christmas gifts. For a long time I stood there looking at it. A present. That was what Diane wanted Christmas to be, wasn't it? A performance. A stage. A perfect family dinner where I would sit quietly at the end of the table while another woman smiled beside my husband. But Diane had forgotten something. I was not furniture. I was not decoration. And I was no longer interested in keeping the peace at the cost of my dignity. That night before bed, I removed my wedding ring and placed it beside the red envelope. The diamond caught the light from the lamp. For a moment, I remembered the day Ethan gave it to me. The nervous smile, the shaking hands, the promise that he would choose me every day for the rest of his life. Then I picked up the ring and slid it back onto my finger. One last time. Not because I still believed in the promise, but because I wanted him to see exactly what he had thrown away. Christmas was coming, and this year I was bringing the gift no one expected. The day before Christmas Eve, Diane Bennett asked me to come over early. Not invited. Asked. There was a difference. Diane never really invited me anywhere. She summoned me with the kind of polished politeness that made refusal feel rude, even when the request itself was insulting. Her text came in at 8:14 in the morning while I was sitting in my car outside the office, staring at the red envelope in my purse. No please, no thank you, just a command wrapped in holiday cheer. For 8 years, I had trained myself not to react to messages like that. I would breathe, smile, and tell myself that Diane was just particular, that she showed love through control because she did not know how to show it any other way. But that morning, her words felt different, because now I knew. I knew she was not just a difficult mother-in-law. She was not just cold or judgmental or protective of her only son. She was a woman who had looked at my marriage and decided I was removable, replaceable, a problem to be managed before Christmas dinner. I typed back only 2 words. Then I slipped my phone into my coat pocket and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked tired, not broken, tired. There is a certain kind of exhaustion that comes from discovering a betrayal, and another kind that comes from pretending not to know. I was carrying both. At 2 o'clock, I pulled into Diane and Robert's driveway. Their house sat at the end of a quiet street in Dublin, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where every lawn was trimmed even in winter and every porch had wreaths that looked professionally arranged. Diane's house was decorated like a Christmas catalog. White lights wrapped around the porch columns, red bows hung from the windows. A perfect evergreen wreath sat on the front door. Everything about it said warmth. Everything inside it had always felt cold. Diane opened the door before I could knock. "Oh, Claire," she said, looking me up and down, "you wore jeans." I glanced down at my dark jeans and cream sweater. "I'm here to help cook, Diane, not attend a gala." Her smile tightened. "Well, presentation matters, even in the kitchen." There it was, the first cut of the afternoon, small enough to deny, sharp enough to bleed. I stepped inside. The house smelled like roasted nuts, cinnamon, and something expensive from a candle Diane probably claimed was imported. Christmas music played softly from hidden speakers. In the living room, a 12-foot tree stood near the fireplace, decorated entirely in gold and ivory ornaments. No handmade decorations, no family photos, nothing imperfect. Diane had always treated Christmas like a competition she was determined to win. Robert was in the living room, placing logs beside the fireplace. He looked up when he saw me. "Claire," he said warmly, "good to see you." "You too, Robert." His smile faded slightly, as if he wanted to say more but did not know how. That had always been Robert's way. Kind eyes, quiet mouth, a man who seemed to notice everything and confront nothing. Diane clapped her hands once. "Claire, come to the kitchen. I need the cranberry sauce transferred into the crystal bowl and the silverware polished. Vanessa offered to help tomorrow, but I told her she should just come and enjoy herself." I stopped walking, only for a second. Then I continued. "Vanessa is very generous," I said. Diane glanced back at me, clearly searching my face for something. Anger, suspicion, pain. I gave her nothing. "Yes," she said slowly, "she is. Such a bright young woman, so elegant. Some women just naturally light up a room." I opened a drawer and took out the polishing cloth. How nice for her. Diane's eyes narrowed. She had expected me to ask why Vanessa was coming. She had expected jealousy, maybe tears, maybe a scene she could later describe as proof that I was unstable. But I had spent 2 weeks learning the value of silence. Silence made careless people confident, and confident people revealed more than they meant to. For the next hour, Diane moved around the kitchen like a queen inspecting servants. She corrected the way I folded napkins. She told me the green beans needed more almonds. She asked whether I had remembered to bring something decent to wear the next evening. I answered every comment with calm politeness. Yes, Diane. Of course, Diane. That sounds lovely. Inside, I was memorizing everything. At one point, she leaned against the counter with a glass of white wine, though it was barely past 3. You know, she said, Christmas can be difficult for people who are alone. I looked up from the silverware. Is that why Vanessa is coming? Diane smiled, pleased I had finally taken the bait. Partly, she doesn't have close family nearby, and Ethan thought it would be kind. You thought that? Well, Diane said, waving at me, we all do. Such a small one, such a clear confession. I placed a polished fork carefully in the towel. That's thoughtful, Diane said. She and Ethan work very well together. I'm sure you've noticed how demanding his career has become. Real estate requires a certain kind of energy, a certain ambition. I looked at her. And you think Vanessa has that? Diane's smile sharpened. I think Vanessa understands him. There it was. Not loud, not direct, but unmistakable. I felt something inside me twist, but I did not let it show. Instead, I smiled. Understanding is important. Diane looked almost disappointed that I had not cracked. After a while, she sent me to the dining room to set place cards on the table. That was when I saw it. The table was long, polished dark wood set for 14 people. Red chargers, white plates with gold trim, crystal glasses, candles waiting to be lit. Each place setting had a small ivory card with a name written in Diane's perfect cursive. Robert at one end, Diane at the other. Ethan to Diane's right. Beside Ethan, in the seat that had always been mine, was a card that read, I stared at it. For a few seconds, the room went silent around me. Not actually silent. I could still hear Christmas music drifting in from the kitchen. I could hear Diane opening drawers. I could hear the low hum of the heater. But inside me, everything stopped. My seat was at the far end of the table, near the children, away from Ethan, away from the adults Diane considered important. My name sat beside a booster seat and a plastic cup shaped like a reindeer. It was so deliberate, so cruel, that for one wild second I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. After 8 years of marriage, after mortgage payments and hospital visits and family birthdays and holidays where I cooked dishes, Diane criticized before eating second helpings she had reduced me to a seat at the end of the table, so another woman could sit beside my husband. I took out my phone and photographed the table. Every place card, every seat, especially Vanessa's. Then I picked up my own place card and held it between my fingers. Claire, 5 letters. A wife turned into an inconvenience. From the kitchen, Diane called, Claire, is everything all right in there? I placed my card exactly where she had put it. Yes, I called back. Everything is exactly where you wanted it. She did not answer. I returned to the kitchen. Diane was stirring something on the stove, but her posture had changed. She seemed alert now, like she sensed something had shifted but could not identify what. I washed my hands slowly. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and for the first time all afternoon, her face softened. Excuse me, she said. She walked toward the hallway, but not far enough. I could still hear her. Vanessa, sweetheart, Diane said warmly. No, don't be nervous. You'll look beautiful. I stood still, one hand under the running faucet. Diane lowered her voice, but I caught enough. Yes, the green dress. Definitely the green one. Ethan loves that color. My stomach turned cold, a pause. Then Diane laughed softly. Don't worry, Claire won't make a scene. She cares too much about appearances. I shut off the water, very quietly. Diane continued. And honestly, once she sees how happy Ethan is with you, maybe she'll finally understand. As if I were a stubborn child refusing to accept a lesson. As if my husband's betrayal were a natural transition and not a knife in my back. I looked down at my wet hands. For years, Diane had mistaken my restraint for weakness. That was her biggest mistake. I dried my hands, walked back to the counter, and continued polishing silverware. When Diane returned, I was humming along softly to the Christmas music. She seemed unsettled by that. Everything fine? She asked. I smiled. Perfectly. At 5:30, Ethan called. I stepped onto the back porch to answer. The cold air hit my face, clean and sharp. The sky was already turning dark, and snow clouds hung low over the neighborhood. Hey, Ethan said. Mom said you're helping. I am. She also said you seemed quiet. I looked through the glass door at Diane, who was pretending not to watch me. I'm just focused. There was a pause. Then Ethan sighed. Claire, tomorrow is important to Mom. Can we just have one peaceful Christmas? There it was again, peaceful. I leaned against the porch railing. Is there anything you want to tell me before tomorrow night? Silence. Not long, but long enough. What do you mean? He asked. I closed my eyes. He still had a chance. Even then, some wounded part of me wanted him to take it, to tell the truth, to say he was sorry, to admit that he had been selfish, cowardly, cruel. But Ethan did what Ethan always did. He chose himself. I mean, he said carefully, Vanessa might be there, and I don't want you making it awkward. I opened my eyes. Snow had started falling again. I see. She doesn't have anyone. Claire, it's Christmas, and I'm your wife. Another pause, then quieter. Nobody said you weren't. I almost smiled, because that was the problem, wasn't it? No one had said I was not his wife. They had simply started acting like it. I won't make anything awkward, I said. Ethan exhaled, relieved. Thank you. He thought he had won. That almost made me sad. After I hung up, I stayed on the porch for another minute, letting the cold settle around me. Through the window, I could see Diane arranging candles on the dining table, moving each one until it stood exactly where she wanted it. A perfect table. A perfect Christmas humiliation. That night when I got home, Ethan was already asleep, or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched him for a moment. The man I had loved was still there in shape. Same dark hair, same shoulders, same hand resting on the blanket where my hand used to fit so naturally. But something essential was gone. Maybe it had been gone for a long time. Maybe I had been loving a memory while living with a stranger. I walked into my office and closed the door. The red envelope was still in my desk drawer. I took it out and placed it under the lamp. Then I opened the folder beside it and reviewed everything one last time. Screenshots, receipts, bank statements, the photograph of Vanessa's place card beside Ethan, the message from Diane, the paperwork from my attorney, all clean, all organized, all real. My hands no longer shook. At midnight, I signed the final page. My signature looked calm, stronger than I felt. I sat there for a long time, pen still in hand, listening to the quiet house around me. Somewhere down the hall, Ethan turned over in bed. I wondered if he dreamed peacefully. I wondered if Vanessa was excited about her green dress. I wondered if Diane had already imagined tomorrow night as the moment I would finally understand my place. Then I slipped the papers back into the red envelope and tied the gold ribbon into a neat bow. Before turning off the light, I removed my wedding ring again. For a second, I held it in my palm. It felt heavier than it should have. Then I put it back on. One last performance, one last dinner, one last night as Mrs. Ethan Bennett. Tomorrow, Diane would seat me at the end of the table. She would smile. Vanessa would arrive in green. Ethan would pretend nothing was wrong. And I would let them. Because sometimes the best way to expose people is not to interrupt the show. It is to let them walk confidently onto the stage. Then raise the curtain yourself. Christmas evening arrived wrapped in snow and silence. All afternoon, Ethan acted like a man walking across thin ice. He showered twice, changed shirts 3 times, checked his phone so often that I stopped counting. Every few minutes, his eyes would flick toward me, then away again, as if he expected me to suddenly ask the question he had been avoiding for weeks. But I did not ask. I moved through the house calmly, curling my hair in the bathroom mirror, applying lipstick with a steady hand, fastening a pair of pearl earrings my father had given me years before he died. Ethan stood in the bedroom doorway while I zipped my black dress. "You look nice," he said. Nice. The word landed between us like a paper napkin dropped on a grave. I looked at him through the mirror. "Thank you." He shifted his weight. "Mom said dinner starts at 6. "I know. And Vanessa is coming." I turned slowly. There it was. Not a confession. Not an apology. Just a small announcement dressed as caution. "Yes," I said, "your coworker." His jaw tightened slightly. "Claire, please don't do that." "Do what?" "Make it sound like something it isn't." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because he still thought he had control over the language of his betrayal. A mistress became a coworker. A family humiliation became a holiday dinner. A wife's pain became awkwardness. "I'm only using the word you gave me," I said. Ethan rubbed his forehead. I just want a night to be peaceful. There was that word again. Peaceful. By then, I understood what Ethan meant when he said peace. He meant silence from me. Comfort for him. A room where no one had to confront what everyone already knew. I picked up my coat from the bed. Then let's not be late. He watched me for a moment, uneasy. I could feel him trying to read my face, trying to decide whether my calmness was forgiveness, ignorance, or danger. He guessed wrong. At 5:45, we pulled into Diane and Robert's driveway. Their house glowed against the winter darkness. White lights wrapped around the roofline. Candles flickered in every window. Several cars were already parked outside, and through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see movement, warm shadows, people laughing. A perfect Christmas scene. The kind of image people posted online with captions about family and blessings. Ethan turned off the engine but did not get out immediately. "Claire," he said. I looked at him. His hands were still on the steering wheel. "If anything feels uncomfortable tonight, can we just talk about it later?" I studied his face. The man really believed betrayal could be scheduled for a more convenient time. "Of course," I said softly. Relief passed over him. Poor Ethan. He had always mistaken my softness for surrender. Inside my purse, the red envelope rested beneath my gloves. Heavy. Ready. The front door opened before we reached it. Diane stood there in a burgundy velvet dress, pearls around her neck, her silver hair swept into a smooth twist. She looked elegant, expensive, and pleased with herself. "Ethan," she said warmly, kissing his cheek. Then she turned to me. "Claire, you made it." The words were polite. The meaning was not. I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. For the first time, something flickered across her face, uncertainty. Only for a second. Then she recovered and pulled me into a thin, careful hug that smelled like perfume and control. The house was full of people. Ethan's Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark stood near the fireplace. His cousins were gathered by the tree, laughing over glasses of wine. Children ran past in sweaters with reindeer and snowflakes. Robert came over and kissed my cheek. "Merry Christmas, Claire," he said gently. "Merry Christmas, Robert." His eyes lingered on mine a little too long. I wondered what he knew, or what he had chosen not to know. Diane swept one hand toward the living room. "Everyone, Claire and Ethan are here." Several people greeted us. I smiled, answered questions, accepted a glass of wine I had no intention of drinking. Ethan stayed close for the first 5 minutes, performing husbandhood with one hand lightly touching my back. Then the doorbell rang. His hand dropped. That was the first thing I noticed. Not Diane's smile, not the sudden lift of her chin, not the way the room seemed to pause before anyone admitted it had paused. Ethan's hand simply left my back, as if my body had become something he no longer wanted to be caught touching. Diane moved to the door herself. "Oh, she's here," she said brightly. She, no name needed. When the door opened, Vanessa Cole stepped inside wearing the green dress. Of course she did. Emerald satin fitted at the waist, soft waves of blonde hair falling over one shoulder. Her makeup was perfect in that effortless way that was never actually effortless. In one hand, she held a bottle of red wine. In the other, a small gold gift bag. She looked less like a lonely coworker and more like a woman arriving exactly where she believed she belonged. "Vanessa, darling," Diane said, embracing her with both arms. "Merry Christmas, darling." Across the room, Aunt Linda's eyebrows lifted. Robert looked down into his drink. Ethan stepped forward, then seemed to remember himself and stopped. Vanessa smiled at him anyway. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. Her voice carried just enough warmth to be noticed. Then Diane turned, one hand still on Vanessa's arm. "Everyone, this is Vanessa Cole. She works with Ethan. Poor thing didn't have family nearby for the holiday, so of course we couldn't let her spend Christmas alone. Poor thing." I looked at Vanessa. She did not look poor, and she certainly did not look alone. Diane guided her directly toward me. "Vanessa, this is Claire, Ethan's wife." The pause before the word wife was small, but I heard it. Vanessa extended her hand. "You must be Claire," she said. "Ethan has told me so much about you." I took her hand. Her grip was cool and delicate. "Funny," I said. "He's told me almost nothing about you." The room did not go silent. Not completely. But nearby conversations thinned. A cousin stopped laughing halfway through a sentence. Someone in the kitchen dropped a spoon. Vanessa's smile stiffened. Ethan cleared his throat. Diane's eyes flashed. Well, Diane said quickly, let's not stand in the entryway. Vanessa, come warm up by the fire. And just like that, Diane led my husband's mistress into the living room as if she were an honored guest. Dinner was served 20 minutes later. I let everyone enter the dining room ahead of me. I wanted to watch. Diane took her seat at the head of the table. Robert sat at the other end. Ethan moved toward his usual place beside Diane. Vanessa approached the chair next to him and stopped with a little gasp that sounded rehearsed. Oh, she said, touching the place card. I'm beside Ethan? Diane smiled. It just made sense. You two work together after all. Ethan did not look at me. That was how I knew he had seen the arrangement before. He pulled out Vanessa's chair, slowly, carefully, like a man trying to be polite and not intimate at the same time. I walked to the far end of the table and found my name beside a 6-year-old cousin named Tyler, who was using his spoon to make his mashed potatoes into a volcano. Tyler grinned at me. Hi, Aunt Claire. I smiled at him because none of this was his fault. Hi, buddy. Across the table, Vanessa sat beside my husband, in my seat, wearing the dress Diane had chosen, at the Christmas dinner Diane had staged. For a moment, the pain was so sharp that I had to press my hand against my lap under the table. Not because I still wanted Ethan. That was the strange part. By then, the illusion had cracked too deeply. But the disrespect still hurt. The years still hurt. The memory of loving someone who could sit across from you and pretend not to see your humiliation, that hurt. Diane lifted her glass. I want to say how grateful I am to have everyone here tonight, she said. Christmas is about family, forgiveness, and making room for new beginnings. Her eyes moved to Vanessa, then to me. Several people shifted uncomfortably. I raised my glass slightly. I agree, I said. New beginnings are important. Ethan finally looked at me. There it was again, fear. Good. Dinner began. Diane performed beautifully. She asked Vanessa about work, complimented her dress, laughed too warmly at her stories. Every few minutes, she found a way to connect Vanessa and Ethan. Oh, Ethan loves that restaurant too. Ethan always says Vanessa has the best eye for staging homes. You two really do make such an effective team. Each comment landed softly, then stacked, one on top of another, until the whole table could feel what Diane was building. Vanessa played her part with equal care. She did not touch Ethan too obviously at first, just a brush of fingers when passing the bread, a hand near his arm while laughing, a private smile when someone mentioned office holiday parties, small enough to deny, clear enough to wound. At one point, Aunt Linda leaned forward. So, Vanessa, she asked, voice sweet but sharp, are you married? Vanessa glanced at Ethan, just for a second, then she smiled. Not yet. My knife touched my plate, a tiny sound, but everyone near me heard it. Ethan's face paled. Diane reached for the gravy boat too quickly. More turkey, Claire? She asked. No, thank you. My voice was calm, almost gentle. That seemed to frighten Ethan more than anger would have. As the meal continued, I let myself remember, not because I wanted to suffer, because I wanted to understand how far I had come. I remembered our first Christmas as newlyweds, eating takeout on the floor because we could not afford a proper dining table yet. Ethan had wrapped a scarf around my shoulders and told me that one day he would give me the kind of Christmas I deserved. I remembered Diane's surgery 3 years later, when I slept in a hospital chair for 2 nights because Ethan said he could not handle seeing his mother in pain. I remembered paying off one of Ethan's business credit cards from my savings after a slow year in real estate because marriage, I believed, meant carrying each other through the hard parts. And now he was sitting beside another woman, smiling weakly while his mother erased me one compliment at a time. By the time dessert was served, I no longer felt like crying. Something inside me had gone very still. Diane tapped her spoon lightly against her glass. Before dessert, I thought we might open a few gifts early, she announced. Just the special ones. Vanessa's cheeks flushed. Ethan looked down. I set my napkin on the table. Special ones, of course. Diane gestured to the small gold gift bag beside Vanessa's chair. Vanessa picked it up. This is just something little, she said, looking at Ethan. I saw it and thought of you. She handed it to him. The room watched. Ethan took the bag like it might explode. Maybe some part of him already knew it would. Inside was a watch. Expensive, silver, elegant. The kind of gift a coworker did not give a married man at his family Christmas dinner. Ethan lifted it from the box, and as he turned it over, I saw the engraving on the back. I was not close enough to read it, but Aunt Linda was. Her face changed. "What does it say?" one of the cousins asked. Ethan closed his hand around the watch. Too late. Vanessa, apparently too proud of the gesture to understand the danger, smiled and said softly, "To our future." The table went dead silent. No forks, no glasses, no children laughing. Even the Christmas music in the next room seemed suddenly too loud. Diane's smile froze. Robert closed his eyes. Ethan looked at me. Finally, completely. I looked back at him. Then I reached down, opened my purse, and touched the red envelope. My heart was steady. My voice, when I spoke, was clear. "Well," I said, standing slowly, "since we're exchanging gifts early." Every eye at the table turned to me. I lifted the red envelope from my purse, the gold ribbon shining beneath the chandelier light. I brought one too. For a few seconds, no one moved. The red envelope rested in my hand, bright against the black fabric of my dress, tied neatly with a gold ribbon like it belonged under a Christmas tree. Ethan stared at it as if he already knew. Maybe he did. Maybe somewhere deep inside him, beneath the lies and excuses and practiced expressions, he understood that every betrayal eventually sends an invitation to consequence. Diane was the first to speak. "Claire," she said, her voice thin and sharp. "What are you doing?" I looked at her. "Opening gifts." Her mouth tightened. "This is not the time for theatrics." I almost smiled. That was rich, coming from a woman who had arranged an entire Christmas dinner like a stage play, seated my husband's mistress beside him, and placed me at the end of the table as if I were some distant relative she barely remembered inviting. "No," I said calmly. "I think this is exactly the time." I walked slowly around the table. Every eye followed me. Vanessa sat frozen beside Ethan, one hand still near the watch box, her face caught somewhere between embarrassment and fear. The confidence she had worn so easily when she walked through the front door had started to crack. Ethan did not take his eyes off the envelope. When I reached him, I placed it on the table in front of his plate. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." His face had gone pale. "Claire," he whispered. "Don't." That single word told the whole room more than he realized. Don't. Not "what is it?" Not "why are you doing this?" Don't. Because he knew. He knew there was something inside that envelope he could not explain away. I stepped back. "Open it." Diane stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I will not allow you to embarrass this family in my home." I turned toward her. "You invited my husband's mistress to Christmas dinner and seated her beside him. This family embarrassed itself before I ever stood up." The room went silent again, but this time the silence had weight. Heavy, uncomfortable, alive. Aunt Linda slowly set down her wineglass. One of Ethan's cousins muttered, "Mistress?" Vanessa's face flushed bright red. Ethan looked at his mother, then at me. "Claire, can we talk in private?" I shook my head. "No." His jaw tightened. "This is between us." I looked around the table, then back at him. "Was it between us when your mother chose Vanessa's dress for tonight?" Diane inhaled sharply. Vanessa looked down. "Was it between us when Vanessa was given my seat beside you?" No answer. "Was it between us when your family was expected to watch me sit at the end of the table while another woman gave you a watch engraved with "To Our Future"?" Ethan closed his eyes. I leaned slightly toward him. "You made our marriage public tonight, Ethan. I'm only responding in the same room." Robert finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Ethan, open the envelope." Ethan looked at his father like a child hoping to be rescued. Robert did not look away. Slowly, Ethan untied the envelope and his fingers shook. He opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. The top page showed the words clearly. A small sound moved at the table. Someone gasped. Vanessa covered her mouth. Diane stared at the papers as if the words had personally insulted her. Ethan did not speak at first. He only flipped through the pages faster and faster, as if one of them might reveal this was a joke. But it was not a joke. It was organized, prepared, signed. Then he reached the copied screenshots. His face changed. I watched him recognize his own messages, the hotel confirmations, the bracelet receipt, the late-night texts, the notification from Vanessa about the green dress, the message from Diane telling me to try to be welcoming, and then the photo of the dining table, Vanessa's name beside his, mine at the end. Ethan lowered the papers. "How long have you known?" The question was so small, so selfish. Not "I'm sorry," not "I hurt you," just concern over how long he had been exposed without realizing it. Long enough, I said. Vanessa suddenly turned toward him. You told me she didn't know. The words came out before she could stop them. Aunt Linda made a soft, disgusted sound. Ethan looked at Vanessa, furious. Not now. Vanessa recoiled. I gave a quiet laugh. It was not a happy sound. Not now? Ethan, this is the most honest either of you has been all night. Diane pointed at me. You are being cruel. I looked at her hand, then at her face. No, Diane. Cruel was inviting another woman into your home and asking your daughter-in-law to smile through her own replacement. Diane's eyes flashed. Replacement? Don't be dramatic. Vanessa is Ethan's colleague. You're twisting everything because you've always been insecure. There it was, the old trick. Make the wound about my reaction instead of their knife. I reached into my purse and pulled out a second folded packet. This is a copy of the messages between you and Vanessa. Diane froze. You had no right. No right? I repeated. You discussed my marriage like it was a seating chart. You told her what dress to wear. You told her I wouldn't make a scene because I cared too much about appearances. You told her that once I saw how happy Ethan was with her, maybe I would finally understand. The color drained from Diane's face. Robert turned toward his wife. Diane? She did not look at him. Is that true? He asked. Diane pressed her lips together. That was her answer. Robert leaned back in his chair as if something inside him had finally broken under the weight of all the things he had refused to confront. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood. Claire, please. You're angry. I get that. But divorce? We can fix this. I stared at him. For one strange moment I saw him as he must have seen himself. A decent man who had made a mistake, a husband who expected forgiveness because he had not prepared for consequences. Fix what? I asked. He stepped closer. Us. There is no us. His face tightened. That's not fair. The words landed so absurdly that I had to take a breath before answering. Fair? I pointed toward Vanessa. You brought her here. Then toward Diane. Your mother helped. Then toward the table. And you expected me to sit there quietly while everyone watched you test drive your new life in front of me. Ethan's voice dropped. I never meant to hurt you like this. No, I said. You meant to have both. My loyalty at home and her admiration at work, my savings when business was slow and her smile when you wanted to feel important, my silence tonight and her hand beside yours at dinner. Vanessa stood suddenly. This isn't my fault. Everyone turned to her. She looked at me, eyes blossoming. Ethan told me the marriage was basically over. I nodded slowly. Then why did you need my secret? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I continued, quieter now. If you believed I was already gone, why did you need Diane to dress you for the part? Why did you need to sit beside him at Christmas? Why did you bring a gift engraved with "To Our Future" to his family dinner while his wife was still in the room? Vanessa's lips trembled, but I was done accepting tears as innocence. Don't cry because you got exposed, I said. Cry because you thought humiliating another woman was a way to win. Diane slammed her hand on the table. That is enough. No, Robert said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. His face was pale, but his voice was firm. No, Diane, it is not enough. Let her speak. Diane stared at him as if he had betrayed her. Maybe for once he had. I looked at Robert, and for the first time that night something in my chest softened. Then Ethan reached for my arm. Claire, come outside with me. I pulled away. Do not touch me. He froze. The room felt smaller now, hotter. Every candle seemed too bright. Every decoration too fake. I reached for the divorce papers and tapped the folder with one finger. My attorney has already filed the initial paperwork. You'll receive formal service next week. I've also separated my direct deposits and frozen the joint credit card after discovering charges related to hotels, dinners, and gifts that were not for me. Ethan's face went from pale to gray. The joint card? Vanessa whispered. I looked at her. Yes, the bracelet he bought you in November? That came from marital funds. Vanessa turned to Ethan. You told me that was your personal account. Ethan glared at her. Vanessa stopped talking, but she was already looking at him differently. That was the first time I saw it, the crack in her fantasy. She had believed she was stealing a successful man from a dull wife. Now she was beginning to realize that much of Ethan's life, the stability, the house, the image, the comfort, had been built on things I had quietly carried. Diane, however, was not ready to lose. You think paperwork makes you powerful? She said, voice shaking with rage. You are still the woman who couldn't keep her husband." A few people at the table winced. I looked at her for a long moment. Years ago, that sentence would have destroyed me. It would have sent me into a spiral of questions. What did I do wrong? Was I not pretty enough? Not exciting enough? Not soft enough? Not successful enough? But tonight I understood something clearly. A woman does not lose a man who chooses betrayal. She is freed from him. "I didn't fail to keep Ethan," I said. "Ethan failed to keep his vows." Diane scoffed. "You were never right for him." "Maybe not," I said, "but I was loyal to him while you were coaching him on how to replace me." Her face twisted. I turned back to Ethan. "There's something else you should know." He looked exhausted now, afraid. "What?" "The house." His eyes narrowed. "What about the house?" I held his gaze. "It was purchased mostly with my inheritance from my father. The records are clear. My attorney has already reviewed everything. You may be entitled to some portion depending on the court's decision, but you will not be keeping it, and you will not be moving anyone into it." The table erupted in whispers. Diane looked stunned. "That house belongs to Ethan too." "No," I said. "That house is the home I paid for while your son told people he was the provider." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed, because he knew. He remembered the down payment. He remembered my father's life insurance money. He remembered telling me it did not matter whose money it was because we were married. Back then I had believed him. Now I had documents. Vanessa slowly sat back down. Her green dress suddenly looked less like victory and more like evidence. Ethan's voice broke. "Claire, please don't do this." For the first time all night, he sounded genuinely afraid, not of losing me, of losing the life attached to me. That realization should have hurt. Instead, it clarified everything. "I already did," I said. Then I reached for my wedding ring. The room watched as I slid it off my finger. It came free easily. Too easily. I held it for a moment, feeling the smooth circle of metal that had once meant forever. Then I placed it on the table beside Ethan's plate, right next to the watch from Vanessa. The old promise, the new betrayal, side by side. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." No one spoke. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and lifted my purse from the floor. As I walked toward the dining room doorway, Diane's voice cracked behind me. "You're really going to walk out on this family?" I stopped. Slowly, I turned around. The candles flickered behind them. The tree glowed in the next room. Snow tapped softly against the windows. I looked at Diane, then at Ethan, then at Vanessa. "No," I said. "I'm walking out of the lie that called itself family." And then I left. Outside, the cold air hit my face like freedom. For the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply. Behind me, through the glowing windows, I could see shadows moving around the dining room. People standing, Diane gesturing, Ethan frozen beside the table. The perfect Christmas dinner had collapsed without me. I walked down the driveway as snow fell onto my hair, my coat, my bare left hand. My finger felt strange without the ring, lighter. I reached my car, opened the door and sat behind the wheel. For 1 second, just one, I let myself cry. Not loud, not broken, just enough to mourn the woman who had tried so hard to be loved by people who only valued her silence. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove away from the house glowing like a Christmas card, leaving behind the husband who had betrayed me, the mother-in-law who had underestimated me, and the mistress who had finally learned that taking another woman's seat did not mean she had won. It only meant she was sitting closer when the truth arrived. I drove for almost 20 minutes before I realized I had nowhere to go. The streets of Columbus were quiet, covered in soft white snow and glowing under Christmas lights. Houses passed by in blurs of gold and red and green. Families were probably sitting down to dessert. Children were probably tearing open early gifts. Somewhere, people were laughing around tables that did not feel like traps. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and focused on the road. One breath, then another. My left hand looked strange without the ring. For years, that small circle had been part of me. I used to twist it when I was nervous. I used to glance at it during difficult days at work and remind myself that I had someone to come home to. Now my finger was bare, and somehow the emptiness felt more honest than the ring ever had in the end. My phone started buzzing before I reached the highway. Ethan. I let it ring. Then it buzzed again. Ethan. Then Diane. Then Ethan again. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. For 8 years I had answered every call from that family. I had responded to every message, attended every dinner, apologized for things I did not do just to keep the peace. I had made myself available to people who only appreciated my presence when it was convenient and my silence when it was useful. Not tonight. Tonight, they could sit with the mess they had made. I ended up at Megan's apartment. My sister opened the door in flannel pajamas and fuzzy socks, her hair piled messily on top of her head. She took one look at my face and stepped aside without asking a single question. Only after the door closed behind me did she say, "You did it." I nodded. Then, for the first time since leaving Diane's house, I really broke. Megan wrapped her arms around me and I cried into her shoulder like I'd been holding back an ocean with my bare hands. Not because I regretted it. I did not. I cried because betrayal has weight. Even when you walk away with dignity, you still have to carry the years you spent believing the wrong person. Megan guided me to the couch, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and placed a mug of tea in my hands. "What happened?" she asked softly. I told her everything. Vanessa in the green dress, my seat at the end of the table, the watch, the engraving, the divorce papers, Diane calling me cruel, Robert finally telling her to let me speak. By the time I finished, Megan's eyes were shining with anger. "She actually said you couldn't keep your husband?" I gave a tired laugh. "Apparently, husbands are like houseplants. If one dies, it's because the wife didn't water it enough." Megan shook her head. "That woman is unbelievable." "No," I said, staring down into my tea. "She's very believable. That's what makes it worse, because Diane was not some cartoon villain. She was the kind of woman people excused. She just loves her son. She's old-fashioned. She has high standards. She doesn't mean it that way." For years, people had softened her cruelty until even I started doing it. But now there was no softening what she had done. She had invited my replacement to Christmas dinner and expected me to politely pass the potatoes. My phone buzzed again. Megan glanced at it. "Still Ethan?" I picked it up. There were 18 missed calls, 7 from Ethan, 5 from Diane, 2 from Robert, 4 from numbers I recognized as Ethan's relatives. Then the messages began filling the screen. "Claire, answer the phone. We need to talk. You can't just walk out like that. What you did tonight was disgusting. You humiliated my son in front of his family. Please. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. You have destroyed Christmas." I stared at the last message for a long time. Then I typed one reply to Ethan. I did not reply to Diane. Some people do not want communication. They want access. I went to sleep on Megan's couch that night, with my phone on silent and the red envelope no longer in my purse. Its contents had done what they needed to do. Still, when I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face over and over again. Not when he read the divorce papers. Not when I took off my ring. The moment that stayed with me was earlier, when Vanessa arrived. When his hand dropped from my back. That tiny movement told me everything. The next morning was Christmas Day. I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Megan was in the kitchen wearing an apron that said, even though she was burning toast, "You're not allowed to be sad on an empty stomach," she announced. "I think sadness is allowed whenever it wants." Not in my apartment. I smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks. We ate breakfast on her couch while a Christmas movie played in the background. I expected to feel hollow, maybe destroyed. But instead, beneath the grief, there was a strange quietness. Not happiness. Not yet. But space. For the first time in years, I was not waiting for Ethan to come home late. I was not scanning his face for lies. I was not preparing myself for Diane's next insult. I was not trying to be smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Around noon, Robert called again. This time I answered. "Claire," he said. His voice sounded older than it had the night before. "Merry Christmas, Robert." There was a long pause. "I don't deserve that kindness." I closed my eyes. "What do you want?" I wanted to apologize. I said nothing. He continued, "Not for Ethan. He needs to do that himself. Not for Diane either. I can't apologize for her and make it mean anything." His voice cracked slightly. "I want to apologize for my silence." That reached me, more than I wanted it to. Robert had never been cruel to me. He had always been gentle, always kind in small ways. But kindness without courage had its own kind of damage. "I saw things," he said. "Not everything, but enough. Diane talking about Vanessa too often. Ethan being careful with his phone. The way you looked at dinner before Vanessa even arrived." I knew something was wrong, and I told myself it wasn't my place. I looked across the room at Megan, who was pretending not to listen while very obviously listening. Robert took a breath. That was cowardice, Claire, not neutrality, cowardice. For a moment, I did not know what to say. Then I said the truth. You hurt me too. I know. You let her treat me like I was disposable. I know. His answer was quiet. No excuses, no defense. That made it harder to hate him. Ethan is a mess, Robert said after a while. I almost laughed. I imagined so. Vanessa left shortly after you did. That surprised me less than it should have. She did? Yes. After Diane started blaming everyone but Ethan, Vanessa asked him about the money, about the bracelet, the house. Robert paused. She didn't like the answers. Of course she did not. Vanessa had not fallen in love with Ethan's soul. She had fallen in love with the version of himself he performed at work, successful, admired, misunderstood by his boring wife. But the truth had stripped away the costume. Behind it was a man who had used marital money to impress his mistress and let his mother arrange his betrayal like a holiday centerpiece. Claire, Robert said carefully, Ethan wants to see you. No, the answer came immediately, firm, clean. Robert did not push. I understand. Does he? Another pause. I don't think he understands anything yet. At least that was honest. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a while. Megan brought me more coffee. Are you okay? I looked at the Christmas tree in the corner of her apartment. It was small and crooked, decorated with mismatched ornaments and one string of lights that blinked too aggressively. It was the least perfect tree I had ever seen. I loved it. I don't know, I said, but I think I will be. That afternoon, Ethan sent a longer message. At first, it was full of apologies. Then, when I did not respond, the tone changed. There it was, the truth hiding under the apology. He was not grieving the marriage. He was grieving his image. I responded only once. After that, I blocked his number for the rest of the day. Not forever. Just long enough to breathe. 2 days later, I returned to the house. Not alone. Megan came with me, along with a locksmith and 2 movers I had hired for the afternoon. Ethan's car was not in the driveway. My attorney had advised me carefully about what I could and could not do, and everything we did stayed within those boundaries. I gathered personal documents, clothing, work files, jewelry from my father, and sentimental things Ethan had never cared enough to notice. The house felt different. Not haunted, exposed. The Christmas tree still stood in the living room, half the lights blinking. The ornament from our first Christmas together hung near the middle. I touched it once, then I left it there. Some memories do not need to be saved from the fire. In the bedroom, Megan found a drawer half open. Inside were receipts, cologne, and a small velvet box. Empty. She held it up. The bracelet? I nodded. Neither of us said anything. There was no need. As we carried boxes toward the front door, a car pulled into the driveway. Ethan. He got out quickly, wearing yesterday's clothes and a face full of panic. Claire. Megan stepped in front of me. Don't. Ethan ignored her. Claire, please, just 5 minutes. I looked at him across the snowy walkway. He seemed smaller than he had at dinner, less polished, less certain. The man who had once filled rooms with charm now looked like someone who had misplaced the script. There's nothing to talk about, I said. Yes, there is. I ended it with Vanessa. I stared at him. He said it like an offering, like I was supposed to be grateful he had closed the door after burning down the house. Congratulations. His face twisted. That's it. What do you want me to say? I want you to understand that I made a mistake. No, Ethan. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is buying the wrong kind of milk. You had an affair. You lied. You let your mother help you humiliate me on Christmas. He looked down. I was confused. I shook my head. You were comfortable. That landed. His eyes lifted to mine. What does that mean? It means you were comfortable letting me be the wife who paid bills, kept the house stable, showed up for your family, and protected your image. And you were comfortable letting Vanessa be the woman who made you feel exciting. You weren't confused, Ethan. You were greedy. For once, he had no answer. Behind me, the locksmith finished changing the code on the side door. The sound was small, metallic, final. Ethan heard it. His eyes shifted toward the house. You're changing the locks? I'm securing my property while the legal process begins. Our property, he snapped. I looked at him calmly. That's for the attorneys to discuss. Fear flashed across his face. There it was again. Not heartbreak. fear, loss of access, loss of comfort, loss of control. You can't just erase me from my own life, he said. I stepped closer. No, you did that yourself. I'm only cleaning up the mess. Megan touched my arm gently. The movers loaded the last box. I turned to leave, but Ethan spoke again. Do you miss me at all? That question stopped me. Not because it tempted me, because the answer was sadder than anger. I looked at the man I had married, the man I had defended, the man I had loved so deeply that I had mistaken endurance for devotion. Yes, I said. Hope flickered in his eyes. Then I finished. I miss who I thought you were. His face crumpled. I got into Megan's car and closed the door. As we drove away, I looked back once. Ethan stood in the driveway, snow falling around him, staring at the house he had assumed would always be waiting for him. For years, I had been that house too. Warm, available, forgiving, but not anymore. That night, I slept in Megan's guest room with boxes stacked around me and my future completely uncertain. And still, for the first time in a long time, I slept without wondering where my husband was. Sometimes freedom does not arrive like fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly in a borrowed room with swollen eyes, a bare ring finger, and the first peaceful night you have had in years. By the time spring arrived in Ohio, the snow had melted from the sidewalks, but the coldness Ethan left behind took longer to disappear. Divorce, I learned, was not a single door closing. It was paperwork, emails, bank records, attorney calls during lunch breaks, quiet evenings where grief arrived without warning because you found an old coffee mug or a photo in a drawer or a grocery list written in handwriting you once loved. Some days I felt strong. Other days, I felt like I was rebuilding myself with shaking hands. But even on the hardest days, I never regretted leaving that Christmas dinner. Not once. Ethan tried different versions of himself during those months. First, he was sorry. Then he was wounded. Then he was angry. Then he was sorry again, but only after anger failed. His messages came through his attorney after I refused to speak to him directly. He wanted another chance. He wanted mediation. He wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict. That phrase made my lawyer Patricia raise one eyebrow. Men who create conflict often become very passionate about avoiding it once consequences arrive, she said dryly. I liked Patricia. She was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and impossible to intimidate. She had the kind of voice that made people sit up straighter without knowing why. When the mediation date finally came, I wore a navy suit, low heels, and my pearl earrings. Not because I wanted to look powerful, because I wanted to feel like myself. The meeting took place in a conference room downtown with wide windows overlooking a gray Columbus morning. The table was long and polished, not unlike Diane's Christmas table, but this time I was not seated at the end like an afterthought. I sat beside my attorney, centered, prepared. Ethan arrived 10 minutes late. He looked thinner, tired. His hair was slightly too long, and the confidence he used to wear like a tailored jacket seemed wrinkled now. Diane came with him. Of course she did. She walked in wearing a cream coat and the same pearl earrings she had worn on Christmas, her posture straight, her expression cold. She looked at me as if I were the one who had shamed the family. I looked back calmly. That was the first victory. Not the house, not the money, not the legal outcome. The first victory was realizing Diane no longer made me feel small. Ethan sat across from me. Diane sat beside him, though she was not a party to the divorce and technically had no reason to be there except control. Patricia looked at her over her glasses. Mrs. Bennett, you understand this mediation concerns Claire and Ethan, correct? Diane smiled tightly. I'm here to support my son. Patricia nodded. Support is welcome. Interference is not. For the first time that morning, I almost smiled. The mediator began with standard explanations: property division, marital accounts, debt responsibility, the house, the joint credit card, documentation. Ethan kept his eyes on the table. Diane kept hers on me. When Patricia presented the records showing the down payment on the house had come primarily from my father's inheritance, Diane shifted in her chair. That money was used during the marriage, she said. It became part of Ethan's life, too. Patricia did not even blink. It became part of the home. That does not erase its source. Diane's mouth tightened. Ethan finally spoke. I lived there, too. I looked at him. Yes, I said. You did. His eyes lifted to mine. For a second I saw the old Ethan, the one who used softness when charm failed. Claire, he said quietly, that house was our home. The word R tried to reach something in me. It almost did. Then I remembered Vanessa's green dress, the place card, the watch, his hand dropping from my back. No, I said. It was my home. You were living in it while building a future with someone else. He flinched. Diane leaned forward. You keep acting like Ethan is the only one who made mistakes. I turned to her. What mistake did I make, Diane? She gave a humorless laugh. You were cold. You cared more about your job than your marriage. You never understood what Ethan needed. I let the words sit there, not because they hurt, because I wanted everyone in the room to hear how easily she transformed betrayal into criticism of the betrayed. Patricia started to speak, but I raised one hand gently. I'd like to answer that. The room became still. I looked at Diane. For 8 years I showed up for your family. I cooked at your holidays. I sat beside you during your surgery. I helped Ethan when business was slow. I paid bills quietly so he would not feel embarrassed. I remembered your birthdays, your appointments, your preferences, your rules. My voice stayed even. But what I did not do was disappear enough for you. I did not become invisible enough. And when Ethan found someone who made him feel admired without asking him to be accountable, you helped him make room for her. Diane's face hardened. You were twisting everything. No, I said. I'm finally saying it clearly. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. Mom, he muttered. Stop. Diane turned to him, stunned. What? He did not look at her. Just stop. It was not courage, exactly. It came too late for that, but it was something. The mediator redirected the conversation back to the settlement. The evidence was not dramatic anymore. That was the strange thing. What had shattered my life on Christmas now appeared as simple documents in a folder. Charges, receipts, screenshots, statements, facts. There is power in facts. They do not need to scream. The bracelet purchased with the joint card was assigned to Ethan's responsibility. The hotel charges were documented. The account withdrawals were reviewed. The house remained primarily with me, with a limited settlement amount negotiated through the attorneys. Ethan fought harder over the house than he had fought for the marriage. That told me everything I still needed to know. At one point, he leaned forward, voice low. Claire, if you take the house, where am I supposed to go? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, that question would have mattered more if you had asked where I was supposed to sit on Christmas. He looked away. Diane's face flushed red. The mediator cleared her throat and continued. Hours passed. By the time we signed the preliminary agreement, the sky outside had darkened with rain. Ethan stared at the papers in front of him as if signing them might physically hurt. Maybe it did. I knew the feeling. When it was done, Diane stood so quickly her chair rolled backward. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You walked away with everything. I gathered my folder. No, Diane, I walked away with what was mine. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You never deserved my son. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt no anger, only distance. Maybe not, I said, but I deserved honesty, and that was clearly too expensive for this family. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Ethan stood slowly. I paused at the door. He looked like he wanted to say something meaningful, something final, something that might rewrite the ending into a softer shape. Instead, he whispered, I'm sorry. The words were late, small, but they were the closest thing to truth he had given me in months. I nodded once. I know. Then I walked out. The divorce was finalized in early summer. There was no celebration, no dramatic music, no lightning strike of freedom. Just an email from Patricia confirming that it was done. I sat at my desk at work, read the message twice, then closed my laptop and walked outside. The air was warm. The sky was clear. People passed by carrying coffee, laughing into phones, living ordinary lives. And I stood there on the sidewalk, no longer Mrs. Ethan Bennett, just Claire Whitman again. At first, the name felt unfamiliar. Then it felt like coming home. The months that followed were not perfect. Healing never moved in a straight line. Some nights I missed being married. Not Ethan exactly, but the idea of having someone. The comfort of shared routines. The illusion of safety. Other nights I danced barefoot in my kitchen while making dinner for one, grateful that no one was lying upstairs, no phone was being hidden, no mother-in-law was deciding whether I was worthy of respect. Robert called once in September. He asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no. Then I remembered that healing did not require me to keep every door locked forever, only the ones that led back to harm. We met at a small cafe near the river. He looked nervous when he sat down. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "You're okay." He folded his hands around his cup. "I left Diane." I stared at him. He gave a sad smile. "Not because of you, or maybe because of what I finally saw through you. I spent too many years calling silence peace." The words settled between us. I understood that sentence better than he knew. Robert did not ask for forgiveness. That made it easier to give him a little. Not all at once, but enough to begin. By the time December came again, the house was mine in every way that mattered. I painted the dining room a soft blue Diane would have hated. I replaced the formal curtains with lighter ones. I donated the gold and ivory ornaments and bought new ones, red, silver, handmade, imperfect. Megan helped me carry the Christmas tree inside, laughing when we nearly knocked over a lamp. "This tree is crooked," she said. "Good," I replied. "So are we." On Christmas Eve, I hosted dinner. Not for Ethan's family, for mine. Megan came early with cookies. 2 of my friends from work brought wine and too many side dishes. Robert came too, holding a pie in both hands like an apology he did not know how to word. At the door, he hesitated. "Are you sure it's okay that I'm here?" I looked at him, then at the warm light behind me. "Yes," I said. "Thank you for choosing the truth this time." His eyes filled, but he only nodded. Dinner was loud, imperfect, and completely wonderful. Someone burned the rolls. Megan spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth. One of my friends told a story so funny that I laughed until my stomach hurt. No one assigned seats based on cruelty. No one smiled while hiding knives. No one invited betrayal and called it family. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the living room with a mug of hot chocolate in my hands. Snow was falling outside again. The same kind of snow that had fallen the night I discovered Vanessa's message. But I was not the same woman watching it. I walked to the tree and adjusted a small silver ornament. Behind it, tucked in the branches, I noticed one old decoration I had somehow missed. A tiny ceramic house, our first home ornament. Ethan had bought it years ago. For a moment, I held it in my palm. I expected pain. It came, but gently, like a bruise fading. I did not throw the ornament away. I did not hang it back up either. I placed it in a small box and set it on the shelf. Some memories do not need to be destroyed. They only need to stop being worshipped. Then I turned off the lamp and looked around my home. My home. Not Diane's stage. Not Ethan's hiding place. Mine. Last Christmas, they invited another woman to take my place. This Christmas, I finally understood something. A place at the table means nothing if you have to lose yourself to keep it. So I stopped begging for a seat in their family and built a home where betrayal was no longer invited.